parameters like environment, agent and force. If anything goes wrong among maybe agent or force or environment, we this state of unrest comes, which what we call it is disease. So next is, I will not discuss much in detail. There are different factors in climate change. Next is. Next I will skip just that. Next is. Next. Yeah. So coming to environmental determinants of a disease, we see the institutions like including medical or other things, living conditions, individual risk factors, genetic, constitutional, or pathophysiological pathways, or individual population health. This all depends on the environment where we live, and any change in these factors may lead to the any type of infection. These are the interplay between the environmental exposure where climate change might impact, like direct exposure or indirect exposure, like maybe in animal populations. And animal population, since we live in the vicinity of the animals, the human population is affected. Also, indirect exposure of these maybe animals or humans or different type of vehicles which can that around us, human or animal population may also affect this infection. Next thing. So how these elements are climate and health, that is maximum temperature. If the temperature change is there, we know what type of vectors or other things can then minimum temperature or mean temperature, different parameters of their environmental which can affect the climate and health. Next thing. Then coming to the climate and livestock health, this climate exceeds the range of infection diseases, whereas the weather affects this timing or intensity of outbreaks. We know whenever there is starting of this rainy season, we face many of these livestock infections, and there is different type of vectors which are involved in this transmission of diseases may also affect because of this climate change. Next thing. Then how this climate change affect is, there are four types of effect on pathogens, effect on host, or effect on the vector, and also effect on the epidemiology of the infection. Next is, next I will not say about the diversity. This is just the nutshell, what are the diversity of these animals in Indian conditions. Next is, again next. These are the breeds. Just I want to show, because this I will be discussing later how the Goa climate can affect these different type of livestock breeds. Next please. Okay, next. Yeah, this is what is the impact of the animal health, particularly direct effects include the temperature related illness or death or morbidity of the animals arising from the extreme weather conditions. Also indirect effects on the endangered pathways include those deriving from the attempt of animals to adapt to different environmental conditions, and also the distribution of vector-borne infections, host resistance in the infectious diseases, also the food and water shortages. Next please. Now the most impact of this climate change on the livestock diseases may also affect the human, because zoonotic infections, what we call it, the infections which are transmitted from naturally between animals and man. This will be the one of the emerging problems because of the climate change. Because as you are if you if you see the total human diseases, like they are listed as 1,405. Out of that, 870 that we can share with the animals. Means there is no disease will affect the animal or human. So, and secondly, emerging diseases which are listed from 1970 and 73, 177 is regarded as emerging. Out of that, around 73% of zoonotic nature that can be shared with animals by humans also. Next please. This I will skip. Next please. Diseases are emerging infections, and one or two diseases, maybe many of these infections have this impact because of this climate change. Next please. These are some emerging zoonotic infections in the Indian conditions. Next. Certain old diseases also that have experienced a resurgence of because of the change both in the environmental conditions, we call them emerging infections, and climate change also has impact on this. Next please. Then factors of emergence of different livestock diseases. Apart from the different factors, climate change, weather change is one of the factors which can affect the emergence. Next please. Next please. So, what climate change can affect? Vector-borne diseases. These diseases which are transmitted by maybe mosquitoes or ticks or house flies are different. Change in the vector population because of the climate change may affect different livestock infections. Next please. Also, what are the effects on vectors? Because you know certain type of humidity and temperature required for the survival of the different vectors, maybe mosquitoes or other things actually, or ticks also. So these climate change are favorable conditions like sudden rain and sudden some humidity or high humidity. This can favor this breeding of the mosquitoes also. There will be emergence of like dengue or vector-borne diseases like malaria or dengue other infections also, which are being shared with also animal population. Then also human livestock and wildlife interface that is also affected by the climate change. This effect on food security, public health, also on conservation. Next thing. It has also impact on wildlife population, wildlife. Next thing. And there are some infections. There are 12 infections which are been Wildlife Conservation Society has listed 12 pathogens which can have the source of emergence in the livestock population. Out of that, many of the infections are of zoonotic nature, that is shared between the humans and animals. Next. And effects of temperature rise also on, for example, we have taken dengue transmission. Next slide I will show you. Then how this this dengue, it is Egypti, the mosquito, which is responsible for the transmission of dengue. It is increasing its this morbidity also. Also the area of the next. The temperature rise between these different countries. The span or the area which is affected by dengue is also increasing with the increasing that global warming. These are the different diseases which can be mainly vector-borne diseases which are affected by the climate change and the change in the vector density. Next, please. How do we can do mitigation strategies for this? So, in livestock particularly, many of the infections in the livestock with the diseases or any breeds of animals we are maintaining in particular locality ecosystem. So we always advocate to maintain the local land races, local breeds or local whatever the species of the animals are there, that has to be maintained, which can have withstand this change in the climate changes. Then breeds which can withstand adverse climatic conditions should be encouraged. Also, the habitat connectivity across the Ghats, particularly this is what good for Goa region, in order to facilitate mitigation and adaptation of animal species for future climate change. Next, please. So, though this climate change is changing, affecting not only the short-term weather patterns but also the human and animal disease spread. So, many of the livestock infections are more particularly vector-borne infections, like many are livestock infections, so many toxoplasmosis, so many infections are there, which are directly bearing on the vector population in that locality particularly. So, improving our knowledge base and ability to respond to local, regional and national levels is required. Also, to mitigate the effect of climate change and to better adapt, we need policies that adapt our needs and needs ecosystem change. Also, monitoring wildlife health will also help to provide us hotspots that are trouble spots and to plan for this mitigation strategy. Next, please. That's it. I hope I have kept the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you for Dr. Barabudin for strict compliance first, the timing. At the same time, I think Dr. Barabudin has touched upon very important issue of rise in temperature and increase in the vector-borne diseases. Because these are the creatures which survive in high temperature, and one of the climate change impact is basically rise in the temperature. We all know that we were once upon a time nomadic tribes, and when we came out to become a civilized population, what we got from the nature is two things. One is agriculture crop and another is the livestock. And this is the two things that is so important for the human survival. And today, unfortunately, we have because of this climate change, we are losing many species of agricultural crops at the same time the livestock that we have. Thank you, Dr. Barabudin, for touching upon this very, very important issue. And now I may request Dr. Manoj Gorkar to make his presentation. Dr. Gorkar, please.
Chairman of this panel discussion, Professor Naik, my friend, Mr. Chief Kumar Dogre, who is moderating this session, fellow panelists and my dear friends. Let me confess, I'm a little puzzled in the sense what we've been experiencing for more than a decade now. I'm supposed to be presenting in 10 minutes, definitely a difficult task. But I guess Dr. Balput has already set the tone of this whole discussion. I hope to interact with you once the panel discussion gets, once the presentation gets over and we start having a dialogue and things will be a little more clear. But I still want to make a confession that I am of the opinion, and I don't expect that everybody on the panel necessarily agrees with me, that we are set out to discuss something that we really do not know in its completeness. There are serious gaps in our understanding of what we have in the first place in the state of Goa. I'm just trying to suggest that our knowledge of a complete range of biodiversity is yet to be charted out, and therefore it would be a little premature to talk about the probable effects of climate change and biodiversity, which we still are not very clear about in terms of its diversity. Having said that, let me quickly run through my presentation, and then maybe if you have any questions, I can take them. Can I have them? I certainly don't wish to take you back into the whole notion of climate change and what it really means, but we all have been talking about climate change in terms of a rising temperature or global warming. We're talking about phenology or biological events which get guided by changing season. We are talking about habitat change, fragmentation, loss, and we're talking about how this affects range extensions of animals, how it is leading to loss of biodiversity, how, as Dr. Bhargava rightly suggested, new strains of pathogens are being introduced, and now that they can tolerate this kind of climate in our part of the world. And we're also looking at how this climate change is interfering with animal movements, how migrations are being interfered with. And probably all of this in terms of the socio-economic repercussions on our own species, as the chair of this session very rightly pointed out, is so much of a self-centric introspection. I think it's time we stop looking at the whole dimension of climate change in terms of what would probably go wrong with our own prospects in future, and rather focus more on the contemporary situation. That if we stand to lose out on all that we have had on this planet as a matter of living heritage or some sort of natural endowment that we have received and not created ourselves. And we love to call ourselves very intelligent, as I always get a little critical about self-proclaimed intellect, and we keep on perpetuating the myth that we are an intelligent species. And I say therefore that had we to have been intelligent, this would certainly not have been the state of affairs with the biodiversity in the least. Having said that, let me quickly tell you that we have a lot of problems in terms of biodiversity as impacted by climate change in Goa per se. But I broadly look at it in three perspectives. One is the impact of the biodiversity on habitats. Number two, its impact on what the habitats hold in the biodiversity, both flora and fauna. Number three, the impacts of climate change on our own lives, the socio-economic fallout of climate change. So if I may just quickly run again through the slide, can I have the next one? I think this is what we all really worry about. In the guise of discussions on impact of climate change and biodiversity, this is actually what we really worry about. That how would this probably impact our own food security? Because we talked about fish famines, and there's a good database, trying to establish a cause and effect relationship between the kind of change that we've been experiencing in the chemistry of the ocean, the change that we've been experiencing in the physics of the ocean, and how this would probably interfere with the fish stocks, the notions of mean sustainable yields, and the talk of fish famine. In my humble opinion, these are all manifestations of climate change. Of course, we are also talking about spread of disease and maybe the vectors into new regions. That's about range extensions of certain pathogens. I'm given to understand, of course, the National Institute of Oceanography has been doing a lot of work on invasive species which come into our areas through the ballasting operations. And I know for sure that they've been talking about new strains of cholera which have already been introduced in some of our ports through this deballasting operations, or maybe the ballast operations. And I am also aware of certain species of starfish which have been kind of devouring the oyster bed so very fast that it can raise severe questions on our sustainable stocks of shellfish. It's also got to do with loss of productivity, loss of productive agricultural lands and water bodies, then changes in seasonal cycles with plant and animal variations, and finally, of course, changes in ecosystem. So just to put everything in a nutshell, if I'm to just talk to you about phenology and the kind of impact that climate change would have on phenology. I've been studying butterflies for some time, and I know a good number of butterflies, especially belonging to a particular family called the little blues or Lysanidae, are in for a lot of trouble because there's a complete mismatch between the phenology of their host plants, the time that they would flower earlier now, the time that they are flowering now, is in a complete mismatch or imbalance with the time of hatching of these butterfly eggs and the emergence of the larvae. I mean, when the larvae are there, the food isn't there. So if this sort of mismatch happens not only just about the butterflies, but probably also about so many other species which live in the oceans, there's going to be some sort of a crisis, and it's already happening. Number two is we have a lot of skewed sex ratios. I mean, I have also had this good fortune of working on crocodiles of Goa way back in the 90s, when we were working on the conservation status of crocodiles in Kumbajo Canal. And we had done some preliminary studies. Of course, thereafter a lot of people have been working on crocodiles. But one aspect of crocodilian biology which seems to have been ignored is, in the light of the climate change, what is exactly the sex ratio of many of the reptilian populations? We know that at higher temperatures, what hatches out of the eggs are normally the females. And therefore, if this is how it goes on, we are likely to have single-sex populations in not just the crocodiles, but many of the reptilian species, including the turtles. Coming to turtles, we know what is happening in the coastline. I mean, a lot of us have been very keenly keeping an eye on the policies of the government, and we kind of have our own share of disillusionment with some of the policies concerning shacks and what have you. But the fact remains that today the shore morphology in most of the coastal areas is very, very hostile to the turtle, which instinctively come up to our seashore for the purpose of nesting. I mean, I have got some images of it later. I'm not able to see what is being displayed because I'm not at the right angle. Nevertheless, I'll show you a few. Maybe you can directly go to the last two slides where I put a few photographs showing you the kind of impact that climate change in terms of habitat fragmentation or habitat loss can have on the prospects of turtle nesting. We're so proud as being one of the few states in the coastal region to be a good habitat for the oleoprignate turtles. But today the situation is with a kind of, and I'm not talking about the man-made changes in terms of high mast lighting and shacks and whatnot. I'm just simply talking about the natural phenomena in terms of dynamics of the sea, I mean the hydrodynamics of the sea, or maybe the movement of the sand, in terms of accretion and erosion. The seashore now seems to be very hostile. Even the thermal regimes to which the eggs are exposed today are not very conducive for hatching. I mean, if you look at the database available in the forest department, they would endorse what I say, that the hatching success is not very encouraging. A good number of eggs remain unhatched and they kind of spoil and they rot. So, the recruitment to the stock, the recruitment of new individuals, hatchlings to the population is not very encouraging. This, I suppose, is one of the manifestations. Then, of course, Dr. Bhatute has given us a snapshot into understanding the impact of climate change on the local cultivars of breeds of animals. The same is the case with marine biota. One aspect which has been largely ignored is the impact of climate change on the terrestrial fauna. And as I've said, we've been looking at the butterfly diversity, we have been looking at the agamid lizards, we have been looking at the birds. As we all know, birds depend so much on cues that they get from the outside environment in terms of the migratory activity. And many of these birds, especially the forest-dwelling species, are habitat specialists. So any kind of impact in terms of habitat alteration or change could raise serious questions on their conservation status. I mean, in terms of movement, for example, birds normally get guided by circadian rhythmicity, change of photoperiod, change of temperature, the kind of vegetation that sprouts, and this is what gives them an idea that it's time to fly. And that's what we call in events which guided by seasonal changes, as in phenology. These are the impacts which are likely to happen, and maybe subsequently when I speak to or I take your questions, I'll be able to say more. But I just want to conclude by saying that we have a problem, and we are not very clear on what exactly is the portal of intervention, because the baseline data, there are serious gaps in our understanding. I would just say that and stop, and maybe I'll come back to you later. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Pankaj. I think with the permission of Mr. M. K. Janardhan, can I take the next speaker who has the PowerPoint presentation, and then I can come back to you. I think this is Professor Borkar has rightly said, and in his talk on a topic which is very important in terms of marine ecosystem. And we have an XTP, the next speaker, who herself is a part of this coastal management authority. May I request Dr. Savita Kelkar to make her presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Dongre, respected dignitaries on the dais, and my dear friends here who have gathered here. In my presentation, I would be talking, of course, on the biodiversity of Goa, the changes with climate change, but I would be stressing on the impacts of tiny Goa's ecological identity. Next slide, please.